So hello, like today we're sketching Morel mushrooms. So how we roll is we have resources down below that you can click on, and that's where you can download your high resolution images. I believe you know me, Christine Elder. I'm a naturalist and educator and artist and nature sketching tour guide in Central Oregon. Okay, and I love to illustrate mushrooms, of course, as well, and I hope you guys do too. So we'll be practicing that today. So yeah, anyway, so today I am demonstrating with just the mechanical pencil, and then I have this really nice deep dark charcoal pencil, and then a shading pencil, and then this smudging tool, although you can use your finger maybe, or a little piece of toilet paper or a Q-tip. And then I'm using a little bit of a black pen and then a brown pen. So there's a huge diversity of fungi. You know, most of the time we think of just mushrooms, like, you know, the mushroom that might make a fairy ring in your front yard. But there's a whole diversity. Of course, fungi include not only the substance that, what's it called? Penicillin is made of, but also, you know, lots of plant diseases, insect pests, things like smuts and rusts, athlete's foot and ringworm are caused by fungi. And of course, very simple fungi like the yeasts are used for making bread and beer and sake and soy sauce and certain cheeses. And so that's amazing. And also they're in symbiotic associations, like a lichen is a combination of a fungus and an algae. So, you know, you've probably heard of some of these fungi. There's all different kinds. Now, this image I'm showing you right here is a super cool, weird kind of fungi that attacks insects, especially in the tropics. And I've seen them. They attack an insect, and then they somehow, you know, take over the brain of the insect and make the insect crawl as high up into the canopy as it can. And the fungi grows this big, long horn-like thing. And then as soon as the insect, like this poor ant, has crawled all the way to the top, then the fungi releases its spores, which is a good place to release them up at the top of the canopy. And then it kills the insect. Isn't that amazing? So there are so many different kinds of fungi in the world. And then also in the tropics, I've seen these really cool leaf cutter ants, you know, so they collect leaves to take into their underground caverns, and they actually use the leaves to feed a fungus. So they're kind of like farmers, and they're farming this fungus to eat. So fungus has a lot of roles in the world. And there's some really cool fungi. I love this one. This is one of my favorites, very primitive kind of member of the fungi. This is called the dog vomit slime mold. Can you believe that? And this is called witch's butter. So there's so many weird fungi with all kinds of interesting names. Yeah, Pranjal said we did the ants. Yeah, yeah. And then so puffballs. And then just so many different kinds of mushrooms. And then some, of course, have gills, some have pores. And so, yeah, we just can't talk about all of those today. Oh, I forgot the image of my sculptured puffball. I had a puffball that's about as big as larger than a softball. It was beautiful. I saw that lately. And these are some weird little mushrooms I saw in Costa Rica last year. So, you know, fungi have a huge ecological role in the environment. One of most important one, especially after a forest fire, you know, goes through a habitat, is in decomposing the dead plants and trees and returning them back to the soil. And so there's lots of mushrooms that, you know, grow on the side of trees, like kind of these polypores and the artist's conch, if you've ever heard of that, and turkey tails. And then fungi also have very important ecological relationships with the roots of trees. Something like, I think I read something like 90% of plants have some sort of a mycorrhizal association, meaning kind of the roots of the fungus are attached to the roots of the trees and shrubs, and they're symbiotic, helping each other get nutrients and water. And so, fungi are important in the ecosystem for breaking down plant material, and their partners are bacteria, and bacteria are important in the habitat for breaking down animal material. So, like, if you've ever been hiking in the forest and you smell something and it's maybe a dead raccoon or something, that weird smell is actually the bacteria breaking down that flesh. So fungi and bacteria both work together to recycle all the nutrients, especially in a forest after a big fire, so that those nutrients can be used by the wildflowers and trees like we've sketched the last 2 days. Okay. And so, the fungi grow in all different habitats. Here's a beautiful picture of right where I live and the mixed conifer forests and the Cascade Mountains in the background. So, these kind of forests, like Douglas fir forests, support things like boletes and chanterelles, and pine forests support not only those, but also hedgehog mushrooms, slippery jacks, willises. And then under oaks, you can also find boletes and chanterelles, bluets, trumpets, honey mushrooms, oyster mushrooms. So every forest type has different sorts of fungi that live with it, because like I mentioned over here, a lot of these ecological relationships between a fungus and a plant are kind of a one-on-one relationship where certain species of fungus pair up with certain species of plants. Isn't that cool? Yeah, Mike and Vicky. Yeah, you saw beautiful witch's butter yesterday. Very cool. Okay. So, going to high school biology, there are some parts of a mushroom. And of course, today we're not sketching guild mushrooms. The fungus that we have is in a whole different group. But, you can kind of recognize some of these parts. And again, if you ever want to, learn how to forage for and identify mushrooms for sketching and also identify them for eating, you really have to know about all of these parts. So, we're not going to go into these too much today, but I did again with the that toadstool workshop a few months ago. So yeah, basically for, identifying mushrooms for both eating and sketching, you want to think about the range, like where have you found them? What continent are you on? What habitat, like we said, oak woodlands, or is it a forest, a conifer forest that is? What season are you in? Because some like to come up in the spring, like these morels we're going to draw, and some are more in the fall. Then you're going to want to know more about their, if they're a guild mushroom or a pored mushroom, and what color the spores are. Want to notice the shape of the caps and the stem, their colors, and their scents. Mushrooms have a lot of very unique scents that really help you to distinguish what they are. And again, a shape of the cap and the cups and rings and warts and all that stuff. Now, I do have a blog post on my website at christineelder.com/deadly mushrooms, and you can find some more information there. And also you can find this spore print, which is at that page, and it's also on my website, Make a Spore Print. And so it's a really fun thing to do when you collect mushrooms, to be able to identify them based on the color of the spores. And so I have this little handout you can download that will help you do that, which is a really fun activity to do for adults and kids. And they could turn out very beautiful, like this one. I've even seen people, frame them on the walls and make art out of them. Okay, so anyway, here you see a whole variety of some of those kinds of mushrooms we quickly mentioned. And of course, today, the one we're drawing is this Morel down here. So, the fungi are a very kind of underappreciated group of critters. And so I, appreciate all of you guys that are here today wanting to learn about fungi and their roles in recycling nutrients and helping forests to survive and thrive. Connie says, if I missed yesterday, is it posted on your site to go view? So like I said, if you go up to the schedule, up above where my face is at the top where it says schedule, there's a drop down menu that will show all of the other things in this week. So Monday was wildflowers and Tuesday was the eucalyptus. And like I said, we did have a little tech glitch on the eucalyptus, but it wasn't until we were an hour and a half in and I was just doing this extra thing showing colored pencil and I was almost done with it. So it didn't matter. Okay. Hope that answered your question, Connie. Okay, so moving on specifically to what we're drawing today, the type of mushroom is a morel mushroom. And those are quite widespread over the northern hemisphere. I think there's about 70 species. They're in North America and Eurasia. Many of them are highly sought after for culinary uses. You may have had some before. In food. Tell me in the chat box if you've ever eaten morel mushrooms, or maybe if you've ever had some other fancy ones like chanterelles or oysters or any of the other cool ones. I'd love to know if you have. So, we were talking about gilled mushrooms before. I showed you that, picture here of gilled mushrooms that have gills down below. And that's the most common mushroom, like the type you see in your grocery store, the little button mushrooms, right? And they're the ones that have these gills that are going to drop their spores in this radiating spokes pattern. And a lot of mushrooms are like that, but others have pores and others are more like the jelly fungus and such. So, the morels are in this group called the cup fungi. It's a whole division. And so they're characterized by having these interesting cups. And so that includes, like different, what do you call them? Puff balls, and orange peel fungus, and just a bunch of different ones like these here. I believe it might include the bird's nest fungus as well. I'm not sure, but that's a really pretty one. And just some images to see the variety. Because again, when we want to sketch something, we really want to look at it closely and try to determine how it's different from its close relatives and the variety within it, so that when you're sketching it, you kind of know how exact you have to be and how particular. Just like, the human species, we differ from our closest primate relatives in a bunch of different ways. But within our species, we also differentiate by, the color of our hair and our eyes and our color of our skin and how tall we are and where we live and all that stuff. So anyway, just showing you a couple examples of how the morels are different throughout their range. And so you see how they're really, these look a lot different than these, don't they? But again, noticing kind of the what is the method to the madness? What is the common denominator, so that you know what to look for. And so they have this honeycombed appearance with all these interesting ridges and kind of these parallel ridges that have certain areas within them that are kind of triangular and rectangular, and then kind of a plain stem. Sometimes it's kind of a little bumpy, but these are the kind of things you want to notice. And so relating to this week's theme of fire, morels thrive in burned forests, and it's very interesting that once you go foraging for them, they really blend into the environment, because sometimes they're sort of the same color as the burned soil. And where I live here, we have volcanic soil and volcanic rocks, and those kind of like black and brown rocks have a bunch of little holes in them, and they look almost like a morel mushroom. And it's really challenging to get a search image for finding these mushrooms out in the forest, because they do blend in so well. But once you find one, then you have your search image and you can see the others a lot more easily. So when fires come through, they usually come through, later in the summer like this, and they're going to clear out the competing vegetation and turn all that vegetation into available carbon and nitrogen and other nutrients for the plants and for the fungi. And they're going to clear an area that's nice and sunny. And so one reason morels thrive in burned forests is because then they have more room to grow, not so much competition. And it's thought that the burning of the like moderate intensity fires, not too hot or not too cold, makes the soil more alkaline as a result of the wood ash, especially. And when that combines with water and is absorbed to the soil, it makes the soil more alkaline, which supposedly triggers the morels to fruit, basically from their existing mycelium that is in the soil. So I think there are, other species that thrive in burned forests, but we just want to draw one of them today. And also, like I said before, is that once a forest is burned, all of those other fungi, like those ones that help to decompose the trees, like artist's conch and turkey tails, and those kind of things can come in and colonize and help to break down those trees into soil. So, like we were saying, when you're drawing something, you want to look really closely at it to help you not only identify the species, but to draw it more accurately. And so, if you were just to look very quickly at these two mushrooms, you'd think they were very, very similar. But this one we have on the left is also known as a false morel, which is quite poisonous. Oh, hi, Mina. Welcome from Maryland. Yeah, morels sound amazing. So anyway, we also call these snow mushrooms because they often come up in the early spring near melting snow under conifers. But you might notice that they have a different color. They're kind of more redder than the more cream or rust colored morels. And their structure is more like what would you call, like the folds of a brain, like a cerebrum, whereas morels have this more honeycomb. Also, if you were cut this in half and look inside, it would look different than morels. Morels are hollow inside. So that's just a comparison there. And then here's just another example of kind of a similar looking mushroom. These are called fluted black Elfin-saddles. And these are also under pines and oaks, so they could live in the same habitats. But you see, it's kind of their stem or their stipe that looks a little bit more like a morel and having the ridges, and then the top pretty much looks different than morels. So it's great practice to, to draw something and to observe it and to get your, really be able to observe something with your eyes and, all of your senses to really help you understand it, for both identifying, like if you're going to collect it, need it, as well as sketching it. Okay, so moving on to sketching. Who's ready for sketching? I have people, holding their pencil super light, just tickling the paper to begin with. Keep that pencil moving as if your critter's going to move away. Resist the urge to erase too much, at least not, constantly. A lot of people, especially kids, when they're learning to draw, they'll draw a line and then they'll erase it. They'll draw a line and they'll erase it. And we really want to separate the creative phase from the editing phase, just like when you're writing a paper in school, right? Or for business, right? And then always glancing back and forth between your subject and your sketch. So here, like that you're, drawing the stem and then, looking at the stem and then drawing the stem and looking at the shape and drawing the shape. And you're really ground truthing, going back and forth. Mina says, you take my kids out for nature hikes. Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, good. And lastly, have fun. We're in the middle of a global pandemic and like Armageddon, and we've got hurricanes and we've got tornadoes, earthquakes, we've got fires, and there's so many bigger problems in this world than worrying about if your sketch is pretty, right? So I'd rather have you think of your sketch as a learning process, and that while you're drawing something, you're learning about its anatomy. And I don't really care if your first sketch, that you hate it and throw it away. The real goal for me is for you to understand the structure of something more. And of course, the more you practice drawing something, the better you're going to get. Okay, so anyway, like I said, we're going to do this first huge one here, and we're going to do it in an outline first and then in pencil, shading it. Now, so like I was talking about, how once you know the variation on the theme, you don't have to do something exact. And especially in the field, it's good for you to really observe something first and observe how much differences there are between them and what's the same and what's different. Just like if you looked at a lot of people, you'd notice most people have two eyes, but the color of their eyes might vary. And that kind of thing. So in these three individuals, we see they really vary in their overall shape, and they vary in kind of the numbers and sizes of these little holes. But most of these holes sort of have a pattern in that they're kind of like there's sort of like some main parallel ridges in all of these, right? With these darker shaded holes that are kind of about the same size, maybe as the ridges. So once you know that, you don't have to do this exactly. And it is kind of hard to keep track of drawing all of this exact. So you'll see that I'm just kind of winging it. I'm not doing it exactly. And so you don't have to follow along exactly like I am too. Okay, so again, I look at something first to kind of air draw it and think about those parts and just notice them. And again, we've already kind of looked at the variety in a few different species of the Morels earlier. And remember, you can always come back to this slideshow and look at those other images and practice sketching from those, as well as, Google them on the internet, Morel mushrooms, which are all in the genus Morchella, by the way. So I'd like to look at something first. The longer I look at it, the faster and more accurately I can sketch it. So now that I've kind of looked at those parts, I'm going to start noticing where the direction of the sun is coming from. So the sun looks like it's coming from kind of this upper right area. See how this whole area looks a little bit lighter, and down here looks a little bit darker. So I was just noticing that because I'm going to be adding a bit of shading. And then I'm going to block in just the big shape of the big oval structure. And again, all of these, all 5 of these are different shapes. So you don't have to be exact. You can be as exact as you want. And I measure with my pencil. So I just make these little tick marks to show sort of, how tall something is and how wide it is, just to be a little bit more exact. But again, you can be as free form as you want. The most important thing is that you notice, the commonalities among all the individuals of the species so that you're accurate to the species, and you don't have to be exactly accurate to this individual Morel mushroom. Okay, hope that makes sense. And I want you to draw as lightly as you can. And you might not notice this, but do you see how I have my little pinky finger out here? I don't know if I've ever mentioned this in any of my 70 workshops, but I use this little pinky finger as kind of like a tripod. You know how a tripod has 3 legs, or some chairs have 3 legs, and they're actually a little bit more stable than chairs that have 4 legs. Don't you hate it when you go to a restaurant and the chairs or the tables are like tipping back and forth, and you have to put like a tablecloth, a little napkin or something underneath so it won't go up and down? Oh, that drives me crazy. But anyway, so you might notice here, watch my little finger. See how I have it on the paper? So that is steadying my hand, which just gives me a little bit more accuracy. Does that make sense in the chat box, or anybody else tried that before? So just notice how I do that. Now I'm just getting that stem, or it's also called the stipe, just kind of noticing how long and wide it is. Again, that's super variable, depending on how old the mushroom is. Lynn says, yes, accurate to the species, not the specimen. Yeah, sure. That's a great way to see it. Yeah. And now I'm just going to do a little bit firmer outline here. It's kind of a wavy outline. Again, staying pretty light. In fact, I'm drawing darker than you should. I'd like you to keep your lines as light as you possibly can in the beginning. Especially tomorrow when we do beetles. Every day this week, I'm getting a little bit more challenging for you guys. And so beetles is going to be more challenging. So work up to that. Anyway, you see, now is the first time I'm going to use the eraser and just going to kind of lighten up those tri lines in the beginning. And then kind of darkening my stem. Oh, Vicky says you always use your pinky. Cool. Okay, so now comes the part where it can be a little bit confusing, and you can see this larger version on the left. In fact, this is a lot clearer for you probably than it was when I was drawing it from the handout, and so you might be able to do a better job. But again, I don't want you to have to be a slave to reality. I want you to, follow it as closely as you want, or just kind of have some more creative freedom as long as you're following along with species characteristics and not so much this exact specimen as Vicky had said. I mean, Lynn had said. So I'm just kind of seeing the outlines and using my left finger there to kind of keep track of where I'm at. Again, going back and forth, very carefully looking at my specimen and then my drawing. And again, you might notice the bigger one on the left and look at that instead. You don't have to, follow along with me. It might be better to look at the large image on the left. Because unlike a lot of my drawing tutorials, again, you could kind of wing it here and have more fun. Otherwise, it could be really confusing if you tried to get every single wrinkle exactly as it is. And my drawing might be a little bit small on your screen at any rate. So again, just kind of noticing, looking around, double checking. And so now I'm just going to start shading a bit. Again, noticing mainly you have these parallel ridges with this variety of these deep crevasses. Thinking of it as ridges and crevasses of a mountain maybe, or a cave, or honeycombs. So just use that bigger image on the left. You don't have to follow me exactly because I haven't followed either exactly. And again, the idea is not to be, quote unquote perfect. Perfect is highly overrated, and perfect isn't done, as my business coach says. But it's to observe so that you understand the underlying structures, the basics of the underlying structures, so that you could, next time go and draw one of these kind of from memory, because you kind of know the general idea. Just like people who've spent a lot of time drawing other people, they can draw a person on a piece of paper without referring to a real person. So how are we doing? Are we keeping up? So now I'm switching pencils, but if you only have that first sketching pencil, that's fine. In fact, a lot of times I really encourage people, to just go with the flow, go with what they have, because like I said, I like to encourage people to be able to sketch out in the field. I do a lot of drawing in the field. And in fact, I travel internationally a lot, both for pleasure and for work in scouting trips. I lead nature sketching trips, and I've led lots of birding and wildlife tour trips all over the world, um, from Alaska to Peru to Borneo. And so I'm always out in the field, and I might not have the right materials. I might have, lost them in the plane, or stepped on them in the field, or lost a pencil in the grass. So I like people to try to be super flexible and not to have any excuses about why they can't be perfect. Just try to use what they have and go for it. Okay. But anyway, for fun, I'm just going to show you, because I like to keep things alive, because I know some of you here have been watching my workshops ever since March. And so I don't want you to get bored. So I like to just show you new things. So I found this great this Derwent graphic pencil. What is this, a 4B? No, this is a 6B. So that's a pretty soft pencil. So I'm going to try that first. And again, just kind of experimenting. And I'm just going to be shading kind of that lower left area lightly, just because the sun looks like it's coming from the upper right. Now, theoretically, I could have done this shading first. That probably would have made more sense. Is that looking at this mushroom as if it was like a cylinder. And I always have people practice that. I encourage my students in my courses to practice from still lifes, drawing things like cans of soup or a styrofoam cube, or a sphere with a strong light source, and practicing noticing how light falls on form and how you can see a variety of values. And we've talked about that a lot. I know you guys who've been with me, we've demonstrated that in other workshops. So anyway, you could also have started by doing three-dimensional form, just shading this whole big oval, just as if it was a cylinder, with this darker area on the bottom and the lighter area on the top right. And then adding all of these parallel ridges and crevasses, right? So anyway, just there's no right or wrong way to do it. And I noticed the stem also has a little bit of undulations to the base, so I did a little bit of that. And now I'm just showing using that little smudging tool. You could use just a little piece of toilet paper or some fabric wrapped around the end of a dull pencil or a Q-tip. But these smudging tools are really fun. They're easy to get at art stores or to order. So, I'm just winging this. And when I'm out in the field, sometimes I'm just doing that too, just playing around. There's no exact way. Every artist and every nature observer does things differently. Like here, I'm doing a little erasing just to kind of lighten and blend, because your eraser can almost work as a drawing tool as well. It can be adding some highlights to the ridges, or just blending and lightening some areas. So I just noticed that this stem is a lot softer. So I was just blending those parts of the stem there. Let's see. Sorry. I was looking out the window because there's some neighbors moving in next door. They're making all this noise. I hope you don't hear it. Can't wait to go meet the new neighbors. Okay, what do we have here? Oh yeah, there we go. So that's a Derwent graphic pencil again. And so yeah, just kind of going back. So I usually go over things a few times to keep getting them more well-rounded, more realistic. Because again, if you're in the field, you never know how long you have. So I'll try to get the basic outline, the basic silhouette of something and start to shadow something, but not make it too exact and fully rendered in any one corner of it. So I'll go back, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times, depending on how much time I have to make something more realistic. And especially when you're shadowing and adding this 3-dimensional form, it's really fun, and it can be very time consuming. So again, hopefully you're following along, and maybe you're just looking at this large image on the left here. You don't have to be, watching my sketching. Just kind of, you can go back and forth and notice. Or you can watch me do it first, and then you can come back to the replay and do it yourself. And so as usual, my eyes are looking back and forth. And so that's why I'll often point my finger or point my pencil up to the photograph to help remind me and you to always be what we call ground truthing, what us scientists call ground truthing. Now here, I was just using my eraser again as sort of a drawing tool in lifting out some of those light highlights, because these are big ridges separated by these crevasses, right? And so you want to kind of show those. You see how I lifted that out. Again, no right or wrong way to do this. Just depends on, the time you have and what materials you have and how realistic you want to make this. So yeah, I really love using those smudging tools. But again, if you just have a Q-tip or your finger or a little wadded up piece of fabric, that's good too. But I like to demonstrate with tools to kind of inspire you to get those, maybe next time. Now here, what I was doing is I was just putting down this little piece of paper. I have lots of these little scraps of paper that I put a hole punch through and a circle in the middle. And that helps me to really see the values. Although I'm not using that hole punch today, I'm just kind of using the edge of the white and just noticing how those values change from that upper right part. See how we go down and how much darker it gets in the bottom. Now, one thing a lot of you guys know, if you've been following me, is what I often recommend you do is turn your drawing upside down. So about at this point, what's really fun, especially if you're rendering the 3-dimensional form, if you have your printout like this, turn it upside down. And that will make you see the shapes and the values so much better than you could before. It just kind of switches you over to your right brain and stops you from naming shapes like, oh, this is the mushroom cap, this is the stem, I know what this looks like, to turning it upside down. And that kind of messes with your brain, and it forces you to really look at something to identify it more. And then you can really see how those values change from the sunny top to the shaded bottom, right? Has anybody ever done that before? Okay, so keep going. So again, just darkening up. So whatever materials you have, even if it's just that first sketching pencil or if it's this darker pencil, you really can have a variety of values depending on how hard you push. So, again, I want you to be creative and really use your materials to their fullest. And so if you're drawing with a very light touch, you can even have these 6B pencils seem as light as a 6H pencil. But if you push down on it hard enough, it can be as dark as a 9B pencil. So I want you to really think about that while you're drawing, that the farther you go along and the more you're really adding three-dimensional form, the more you can push. So here I'm demonstrating drawing this little circle. I'm kind of demonstrating how I'm looking inside of these kind of crevasses, as I'm calling them. I'm imagining this is some kind of like rocky mountain area that you could be climbing over with these ridges and crevasses. And so they vary in value amongst them, right? Inside, that's not just a black hole, right? So this first circle, I've just drawn a circle with all the same value. It's just all like this medium dark value. But it would be more realistic to be like this, where some of it's a little darker, some of it's a little lighter. See that? So again, noticing inside here, these ridges, because these ridges aren't as squared off at the top as like a high-rise building, right? They're kind of undulating and round. Now, not so much as that false morel that looked more like a brain, cerebellum or cerebrum, I don't know, cerebellum. But it's still rounded. So I want you to kind of notice that. And even if you can't exactly see that in the photo, just kind of, wing it and know that there are some variations in the depth, just like a cave. A cave opening has, inside the cave has so many shapes in there. It's not just a big square like if you're walking into a room, right? So then I'm going to continue to look harder at all of those shapes and noticing too that since the light is coming from the upper right, that often my darkest shadows will be in the upper right corner of each of those kind of caverns or crevasses or honeycombs, however you want to think of them. Now, yeah, I just put that yellow pencil down to just keep reminding us that that's the direction the light is falling. And sometimes you can't really tell when you're out in the field drawing. Maybe it's a cloudy day and you really can't see much variation in values. Overcast or cloudy day, or maybe it's, sometimes these high resolution images I give you guys, the lighting is kind of flat because they want to, light up all the structures. So again, the more you practice doing still lifes and the more you practice with different spheres and cubes and cones, the more you'll understand how light would fall on a form, even if you don't see that light. Does that make sense to you guys? No one said anything in the chat for a long time, so I guess you must be drawing. Yep, so now here I'm just showing that you can use the Q-tip if you want, but it really doesn't work quite as well as the stomp or the tortillon. Another thing I like about these tortillon things is once you've smudged a bit on it, it gets some graphite on there, and then you can almost use it as a pencil as well. So here, I'm going to draw with it. Drawing with it in its own right because it has some carbon on it. So I'm going to show some of that three-dimensional form of that tubular stem. Oh, Jamie, thanks for saying hi. Yep, I see those neighbors busy moving in. Okay, so now for fun, I've switched to this darker carbon pencil. Lynn, great. I'm glad you like that. So this is just a much deeper, darker pencil, and it's like charcoal or carbon, and that's going to get a richer black than even the 9B pencil. So that's a good thing to always have in your toolkit is a charcoal pencil, both black ones and white ones, because those are fun to use on toned papers. I teach people a lot about how to use toned papers that come in like tans and grays, and then you can use black and white charcoal for really easy, quick effects, giving it three-dimensional form. So just kind of going back, see how dark that is. General's Carbon Sketch. This is my favorite dark charcoal pencil. And again, don't feel bad if you don't have these materials. Just hopefully this will inspire you maybe to pick these up or order them online. Just kind of seeing what they do. And again, I'm looking back and forth at my photograph. I'm not just getting into drawing from, memory or imagination. I'm really looking at my photograph. I might not be doing it exactly, but again, just trying to figure out the general idea of these undulating honeycomb shapes. And I'm just adding some kind of smaller dots there, and because those sometimes there's just little pits. You see, notice there's just little circular pits. They really come in all shapes, but most of the time they're kind of circular, rectangular, or some of them are long, thin crevasses, you might notice. I hope you're following along because I love to have people sharing at the end. So here again, I'm just going to use my my eraser again to lift out, because we have these ridges, and this value of this ridge is much lighter than the crevasse, right? So for fun, I'm just going to lighten that up there with the eraser. Now, I do also have these erasers that are actually pencils, like a pencil shape that you can actually sharpen. I didn't use that this minute, but those are really fun to have too. Now, here's an example of a white charcoal pencil, and that's not going to really work so well on this paper, but the eraser worked good enough. But again, if you had black and white charcoals, you could use those on toned papers to really cool effect. So again, I'm just kind of having fun with this. I mean, you could work on this forever and get it more and more realistic, but the goal here is to try to have a full range of values. So I always say, go big or go home, like the gold medal award-winning snowboarder Shaun White used to say in the 90s. He'd say, go big or go home. And that's what I mean. Like when you're drawing, I want you to really go big and have a full range of lights, like almost as light as your paper, to darks, like almost the blackest black hole of the like black hole of night. Okay. And so that's really going to make something three-dimensional. Now just firming up the edges and cleaning up some of the edges. Ideally, you won't see any line left from your original sketch. To make it really realistic, you want to describe your organism by values and not by outlines. So, moving from just like a cartoon outline, like a coloring page, to something more like this that shows the whole organism without too many actual lines. Now I'm sharpening. I'm going to add a few more details. I'm going to go and look for that eraser. Just a sec. I wanted to show you that. And now I'm going to add some black pen for fun. Again, just to get some nice sharp edges here and there. So this is a black permanent ink pen, and you can see how much definition that's adding. Now I'm just going to add some of this this moss along the edge. Although in reality, these are usually growing among the, like I said, the charcoal of the burned forest, or there might be a bunch of pine needles because they're often in pine forests. So this stock image that I purchased, they made it prettier with these little mosses and things. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those, but if you want to be more realistic and use some pine needles or something instead, you might want to do that. But it's sometimes hard to find good stock images that are realistic. And I'm kind of darkening up the base to make it look like it's in the shadows under the green moss. Using the smudging tool again as much of a drawing tool as a smudging tool, you can see. Just the more you look at it, the more you can see some varieties. Again, it's not so important to make it exact, but to make it realistic to three-dimensional form. So having some lights and shadows, some ridges and crevasses, the honeycombs. Lifting out a little bit of the ridges there. Okay, let me show you here. I'm gonna get my face bigger. So I found one of my pencils that I mentioned that's actually an eraser. And these things are, what do you call this? Faber-Castell, but there's a lot of them. So actually you can sharpen this, and then you can imagine how, let's see, put there. You can imagine how sharp this can be, and so that you can add some really nice highlights in those really narrow ridges. So that's fun to have one of these. Anybody have these? Ria says, you know, you have these materials somewhere. Has anyone else ever used one of these sharpenable erasers or these smudging tools? I know if you've been in my courses so far, you've used the smudging tool. And maybe if you didn't have it before, maybe you've gotten it now because it is cool. And these come in a lot of different diameters as well. So they can have really sharp points and edges or be kind of fatter like this. So there's variety there too. Hopefully you found this to be fun. You know, morel mushrooms aren't, charismatic megafauna, like a panda bear, but they do give you really good practice in rendering three-dimensional form. But sometimes it's good to practice drawing things that are somewhat ugly. In fact, that's one of the things I have my students practice doing. If they're intimidated by drawing and if they're just starting out, choose something like an old dead stick or a broken, leaf with lots of holes in it, or, even some kind of a bone that you find somewhere. Draw something that's really ugly, and that will help you to practice, because I know it's really intimidating if you start out trying to draw like your family dog or a beautiful wildflower, because you think you can't capture its beauty and its form correctly. But if you draw something ugly, that's a good one. Okay, well, I'm going to get going. I'm starving to death. Take care. Ciao.